The entire country, especially Kerala, is in deep mourning as the bodies of 45 Indians, including 23 Keralites, have returned home from Kuwait. Scores of people gathered at Kochi airport to pay their respects to the departed souls. Touching scenes unfolded as people found comfort in each other's presence during this tragic homecoming. As the airport staff began bringing out the caskets, the atmosphere grew somber. Stifled sobs turned into loud cries of grief as the names of the victims were read out. Kerala police honoured the deceased with a guard of honour. At Kochi airport, Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan addressed the media, mourning the loss of lives in Kuwait after the tragic building fire tragedy. He called expatriates the lifeline of Kerala, highlighting their importance. Indians are the largest expatriate community in Kuwait, making up 21% of the total population and 30% of the workforce. Overwhelmingly, many of them are from Kerala. From Kochi, an Indian Air Force aircraft carried the bodies of 14 out of the 45 Indians to the national capital to be taken to their respective hometowns. On the plane's arrival, newly elected MPs Yogendra Chandolia, Basuri Swaraj and Kamaljeet Sehrawat stood on the tarmac with folded hands as the caskets were lowered. While the tragedy has left a deep impact, the focus now is on what many call the invisible Indian emigrants, particularly the low and mid-skilled, their vulnerabilities as they work in countries far away from their home. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor, who has been vocal about amending the immigration bill, joins us on the broadcast right now. Thank you very much, Mr. Shashi Tharoor, for joining us. You've been very unwell, but it's also a very painful day for India as the bodies of 45 Indian immigrants are back at home. As I speak to experts, there seems to be an overwhelming overtone that they are pained and upset, but not surprised. How do you look at this?
I'm afraid they're right. I mean, there is sadly a pretty grim track record of horrendous tragedies in which our migrant workers, and since I'm a political representative in Kerala, let me say particularly Malayali migrant workers, have really come afoul of all sorts of terrible situations abroad. In just recent years, we have lost Indians who have been press ganged into the war front in Russia. We have lost people who got pulled into situations abroad, like the Olympic construction in Qatar, where so many died, and now we've got this fire. So it's a combination, it seems to me, of a great deal of, to put it very bluntly, desperation on the part of Indians to find any remunerative work anywhere in whatever conditions, because the job market is so dreadful. And at the same time, the fact that we don't, as a government or as a country, do enough to ensure protection of our migrant workers in these situations. I'm somebody who spent some time on this issue when I was chairman of the External Affairs Committee, because migration comes under the MEA and not under the Labour Ministry, interestingly enough. But I'm sorry to say that they have simply not been able to do what is needed to be done to craft a credible new Immigration Act.
So what is it that India is missing? Look at Kerala. Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan, who called the immigrants as lifeline of Kerala, and everybody would agree with it. And true for many states in India, for that matter. What do you mean when the government isn't doing enough?
Well, I mean, the fact is that our government has the custodianship, as it were, of a legislative framework that protects or fails to protect migrants. It's the Immigration Act of 1983. I have been clamoring for years to have that act completely updated to take into account the new circumstances 41 years later. And I'm sorry to say that despite discussions within the External Affairs Committee when I was chairman, with the then Foreign Secretary, who's now the Foreign Minister, who was very accommodative of our demands and said he would take action, we haven't seen anything like a draft bill emerging. See, there are a number of issues we need to do to ensure that the lives, livelihoods, conditions of work, conditions of residence of our migrants are guaranteed, first of all, in contracts that employers must sign, and secondly, in terms of foolproof agreements between our government and the host governments. These things are, of course, a challenge, but the bill, the act, once it passes, would be a first important step in ensuring that we let the world know there are some basic standards that we want Indian migrant workers to enjoy when they go abroad.
Mr. Tharoor, from being often called as the invisible workers or the invisible migrants to the huge value that they add to India and its economies, families are currently grieving. But isn't this the reality that even in India today, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough agencies and even experts to look out for them? I mean, to get even data on them at an all India perspective is a huge challenge.
No, in fact, this is precisely the problem. If we look at, for example, the time when so many Indians had to be repatriated because of COVID from countries in the Gulf, their employers could no longer support them there. There was no work going on. People came back in a rush. And these are countries in the Gulf that don't have very labor-friendly laws. Many of them came back empty-handed with absolutely no way of collecting their own unpaid wages that were pending when COVID struck and they were all pushed out. That's a good example of something where India should have done much more to support the wage rights of our people. The other concern I have is very, very seriously that the purpose of an Immigration Act would be to give people certain protections by law, which can then be enforced by law. A lot of these migrants fall victim to touts and agents who basically come and spin them a tall story, get them to sign contracts that they don't fully understand. And when they go to the countries in the Gulf, they discover their situation is quite different. That is the problem that we need to be able to address right here. We need also to stop this distinction we have right now between those who have immigration clearance required passports and those who don't have immigration clearance required passports and so on. I think, very frankly, anyone qualifying as a migrant laborer deserves the protection of the government, and we should ensure that the chances of their being exploited in foreign countries, I must say that certainly that requires protections starting from here, starting from the initial contract with the agents or the employers, and then, of course, an agreement with the host governments to ensure the governments also have a stake in ensuring that the agreements are upheld.
Mrs. Shashi Tharoor, thank you very much for joining us. Despite being unwell, we truly appreciate this. This is just another effort on our behest to ensure that the focus remains on this tragic loss and to do what we can to ensure this does not happen again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sneha. I appreciate your taking the subject up, which is very important for all of us.